Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Coffee Podcast, your weekly blend of motivation, encouragement, education, and insight into all things medicine for junior doctors and medical students in South Africa. My name is Simon Fraser, and I'm a second-year intern doctor at Charlotte Macgregor Johannesburg Academic Hospital. I started the Dr. Coffee Podcast last year to broaden my knowledge and understanding of the incredible world of medicine and surgery and the variety of subspecialties and disciplines that exist within them. I don't know about you, but as soon as I got into medical school, my family and friends, and even some complete strangers actually, would ask me what I wanted to specialize in. And while in the beginning I thought I had some idea of the direction I wanted to take, I soon realized that as a medical student, you have almost no clue of what each subspec is really like. The best way that I've heard this framed is by one of my classmates who said that it's analogous to going to a restaurant without being able to study the menu. It's kind of like you go into the restaurant and you know that they'll serve fish, beef, chicken and vegetarian options with a variety of spices and flavors, but you don't really know what each dish contains. You don't know the price, you don't know the portion, you don't know how spicy it's going to be, and that's a lot like what it is to be a medical student. When you're a medical student, you don't necessarily know the hours, you don't know the goods and the bads of each subspec, and that's why the Dr. Coffee Podcast entered the picture. Each week's episode features an interview with a consultant or senior registrar in a specialty requested by the Dr. Coffee audience, or a topical episode that's applicable and helpful to our audience of junior doctors and medical students. You're invited to learn and grow with me as I discover the perks, pitfalls, and perils of specializing in and practicing medicine in our beautiful country. The Dr. Coffee Podcast has partnered with a number of people and entities that I believe can add value to your life and offer products and services that make being a junior doctor more enjoyable and efficient. The first of these is the Wardworx app. Wardworx is a free patient list and task management app that allows doctors to simplify the way they work. It's a proudly South African app created for doctors by doctors. Wardworx is a fantastic tool that allows you to keep track of and easily access your patient's information, location, and what ward work tasks are needed for them, with pre-populated menu options of the most common blood tests, scans, and referrals, and many others. Doctors can also collaborate on Wardworx securely within their teams, as well as leave notes and to-do lists that make handover post-call a piece of cake. If you're considering using Wardworx, and remember it's free, but your colleagues aren't completely sold yet, they also offer Zoom demonstrations with the delivery of delicious cookies and coffees to help introduce the app to your department. So, where do you find it? Wardworx is a web-based app that you can access through your internet browser on mobile or desktop by simply visiting wardworx.app. However, by far the easiest way to use it is on your phone with the downloadable applications available on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. I'll link to these in the show notes for this episode. Thank you to Wardworx for their support of the Dr. Coffee Podcast since its inception, and of course for their fantastic app as well. Now back to this week's episode. Welcome to episode 23, and a special welcome to the new medical students and new interns who've just begun to follow this podcast. New for 2023, we'll be including a variety of additional short segments into each week's episode. These could be educational, such as a helpful tip or advice or a teaching topic, motivational, such as a quote, a deep thought, or a leadership principle, entertaining, such as a funny or engaging story, or insightful, such as a short additional comment by an expert in an area pertinent to that particular episode. In this episode, for example, I'll give you 2 brief book reviews, actually very brief, so listen out for that. Each episode will be unique in its layout, but one thing I can guarantee is that the quality of this podcast will only be going up and will continue to be worthy of your incredible support and valuable time. Finally, to wrap up this introduction, I'm also very excited about welcoming a new member to the Dr. Coffee team. I'll tell you about this awesome junior doctor over the next 2 weeks via our social media pages and in a future episode. She's currently a CommServe doctor in Limpopo with a flair for humor and eminently cooler than me, so I'm sure you're going to love what she brings to the podcast. Now, the title of this week's episode is 2023, Your Best Year Yet. I think we can all agree that the last 3 years, being 2020, 2021, and 2022, were not normal. And this year is all about rebuilding, putting behind the things of the past, and looking ahead for new opportunities and new growth. What I've wanted to do with this week's episode is to take the stated intention of the Dr. Coffee podcast, that being motivation, encouragement, education, and insight, and put that into a set of helpful tools and directives. And if you feel that that's a bit strong, then feel free to take that as my suggestions, and you can feel free to use them as you see fit. But basically, in order to make 2023 your best year yet. My apologies to everyone for the rather clickbaity title, but keep in mind 2 things. 1, you need to know what's in it for me, and 2, I really believe that these are some practical things that can help all of us. Many of them you've heard before, and I'm sure many of them you know, but much of what we are in life is a function not of what we know, but of what we repeatedly and routinely do. So, without further ado, let's get into some practical ways to make 2023 your best year yet. I've divided what I'd like to speak about into 3 categories, and the first of these is mindset. I think at the start of the year, everyone has goals and ideas of what they'd like to achieve in the following 365 days, but many fizzle out by mid-January because either they seem too lofty and unattainable, or because they didn't have a clear idea of what needed to be done in order to get there, or perhaps some other reason. What I'd like to offer us is to help create a mindset that we can adopt each day to help us achieve our goals. I'm sure you've heard of setting goals that are SMART, that being SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. If you've never heard of this concept before and you're interested in unpacking it some more, I suggest you Google SMART Goals acronym to get into this deeper. But that's not what I want to talk about, although I think you should definitely set goals using that approach or something similar. What I want to exhort us all to is an even more fundamental concept. That is to change our mindset as a junior doctor or medical student to being a generator and not a consumer. Don't be a consumer, be a generator. I mean, look for what you can give in any situation, what you can make of the opportunity, what you can improve, or what you can grow. This means that in everything you do, in each day, look for what your time and efforts are going to produce, the outcomes that will follow your actions. If you're reading something, what are you getting out of it? If it's your school notes, it may be that you'll be a doctor who knows how to manage heart failure correctly. If it's a fictional novel, besides being entertainment and refreshing for you, maybe it's going to generate new vocabulary of experience and creativity in you. What I'm saying is, don't just drink in what the world is offering you and expect your 2023 to be awesome. You need to be intentional. You need to make this year awesome. Don't hope that the vibes find you. Be the one who brings the vibes. If there is a negative culture in the unit that you're working in, choose to be the one who generates a positive culture. Be the one who brings encouragement and positivity. Have a victor mentality and not a victim mentality. You're either a doctor or you're on your path to becoming one. That's incredible. It's a privilege. It's an opportunity. It's noble. It's to be respected. It's to be taken seriously. I hope you can hear what I'm trying to say. This is not just a pep talk. It's a call to excellence in the content of your thoughts and your conduct. It's encouragement to be just a tiny bit better than what you've settled for before. I'm sure you've heard something like this, but it bears repeating. If we took your current ability and let's say we quantified it as a value of 100, so you are 100% of yourself today, and you chose to increase it by just 1% each day for a year. So each day you were timesing yourself by just that 1% extra. By the end of 365 days, you'll, instead of having a total of 100, you'd have a total of 3,778, a massive 38 times of your starting value. Of course, if you were to stay the same, you'll just be that same round 100 you were before. But what's even worse than that, if you allowed yourself to not grow this year, if you actually shrunk little by little, by just 1% per day. That 100 that we started out with, by the end of the year, would be just 3% of what you were before. So if you were 100 to begin with, you're now a 3. That's insane. I hope that you catch the concept here. If we adopt an attitude of growth, a mindset of generation and not just consumerism, you'll enlarge your world this year. If you'd like to explore this topic more thoroughly, I recommend a blog post by James Clear. The title of this blog post is Continuous Improvement, How It Works and How to Master It. I'll put the link to this article in the show notes for this episode. I now want to take a short break and tell you about one of the supporters of the Dr. Coffee podcast, which is Aestheticos Photography Portrait Studio. Aestheticos specializes in portrait and event photography, including professional headshots, newborn baby and family shoots, themed photo shoots, and much, much more. You can find them on Instagram as well as checking out their website, www.aestheticos.art. I will include links to their social media as well as their website in the show notes for this episode. But when you make a booking with Aestheticos, they're going to give you 15% off your package as long as you just quote to them Dr. Coffee. So be sure to check them out next time that you need a photographer for an event, or for building a portfolio, or for a special occasion such as a 21st or graduation. We now come to the book review section of the podcast, and I'm currently reading a book that's a little bit older. It was written about 20 years ago. It's called Doctor on Everest by Dr. Kenneth Kamler, and he's a hand and plastic surgeon who went up to Mount Everest, climbed Mount Everest, and talks about his experiences doing emergency medicine at the top of the world, giving a personal account, including the 1996 disaster, which was apparently a terrible season for climbers on Mount Everest. I haven't finished the book yet, so I can't give you a full review, but I thought what I'd do is just read a 3-page excerpt for you to get a sense of what the writing is like and what might be in it for you. So here we go. Drinking coffee with my feet up on the desk and looking out the window is one of the true simple pleasures of life. The sun was a little higher now, the trees and grass in the parking lot were greener, and there were more people walking around. The view outside was better than the view inside. My walls are too bare, but I'm afraid if I fix up the office, it will enclose me. Long years of studying, followed by confinement to the hospital for 120 hours a week during my residency, left me apprehensive, almost resentful, that life was passing me by. My profession was beginning to seem like a life sentence. At unexpected moments, my work reminds me how ephemeral life is. It can pass quickly, like it did on the night that I cut away a tuxedo from a man who had been hit by a car. His wife, semi-hysterical outside, was wearing an elegant red evening gown. The husband's cufflinks matched the wife's necklace. I couldn't help thinking how much care they must have given to that detail a few hours earlier, and how ridiculously trivial it seemed now. Life is temporary, even when it passes as slowly as an old lady who brought a muffin to her unresponsive, comatose husband every morning. "It's your favorite kind, blueberry," she said to him, pretending he could hear. How she must have wished that he would take that muffin and eat it, just like he used to, an act she probably always took for granted. She sat with him, fixed his hair, and at the end of visiting hours, wrapped the muffin back up and took it home. At one time, I was desperately afraid of growing old without appreciating life while I was still able to. Too soon, it seemed, the little boy in me was fading away as I accelerated along the prescribed route to becoming a member of the medical establishment. In my last year of residency, a respected elderly surgeon remarked that if business didn't pick up soon, he wouldn't be able to pay his maid. Then he asked me if I wanted to join his practice. It would be easy to slip into the lifestyle where success means staying ahead of your bills. Money certainly makes life easier, but it's an add-on, not a substitute. I knew that, looking back, I'd regret what I didn't do far more than what I didn't own. Money wouldn't be a good answer if I wondered, too late, where my life had gone. I had already sacrificed a large portion of it to become a doctor, an undertaking which gave me predictable rewards but also a serendipitous one. I went to medical school in southern France. One sunny day, a girl called me up because she heard that there was an American around and she wanted to practice her English. Josiane was cute, smart, sensitive, and strong, a rare combination, so I married her. I relied on her strength during my residency, a demanding time over which I felt I had very little control. I was looking forward to my allotted vacation in my 4th year, but shortly before it was to start, Josiane's father got sick, and she flew off to France to help him recover. Another reminder, a gentle one this time, of how people's lives can change in an instant. Suddenly, I had 2 weeks off with no idea what to do. But I did have an idea. There is nothing as real as a dream, and if you hold on to it, it will always be there, no matter what else changes. In my mind, I climbed back up the shelf and dusted off that old book. After so many years of thinking it was inaccessible, I made a bridge from one world to another with a phone call, to a climbing school in New Hampshire. My instructor was an ex-Green Beret from North Dakota, with whom it seemed I had nothing in common, but I loved climbing and we hit it off immediately. He turned out to be a sensitive soul with a spirit of adventure, something I felt I was too, but like drops of water from the same lake that flow into different rivers, we had traveled different paths and had mountains between us. 6 months later, he asked me if I wanted to go climbing in Peru. This was my chance to be a real mountaineer, just like in the book. Josiane would have preferred that I stay home, but she recognized that it was a chance to go down the road not taken. It would make me a more fulfilled person, and she didn't want anything less for her husband, so she became my most enthusiastic supporter. The hospital wouldn't like it. I'd have to flim-flam the schedule to take a month off, but I was a chief resident, so I could do it and be gone before they noticed. Whatever happened afterward, I would have had my chance to climb. They might fire me, you know. Lifestyle is more important than resume, Josiane said firmly. You'll still find a job. I went to Peru, climbed some mountains, and even became a local hero when I took care of a load of villagers and animals after their open truck overturned and rolled down a ravine in a remote area. I came back to New York having lived an adventure I had always dreamed about. The doctors in the hospital seemed to admire what I had done, and maybe not surprisingly, the elderly surgeon most of all. Only a token punishment was imposed, but even had it been more severe, it would have been worth it. I had breathed some fresh air and regained my perspective. I returned enthusiastic for climbing, for medicine, for Josiane, and for everything else. I had made the right choice. Doctor on Everest was first published in the year 2000 by Constable and Robinson, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this episode. The second book I want to tell you about is a book called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. When Breath Becomes Air is a non-fiction autobiographical book written by American neurosurgeon Paul Kalanithi. It's a memoir about his life and battling stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. I read this book in 2020 and was struck by just how profound this man's experience of his cancer was as a doctor and as a surgeon, and how he pushed through and persevered and just basically operated in the midst of what must have been excruciating pain, trying to pursue and balance his sense of purpose and his sense of calling with his medicine with the inevitable death that this cancer was going to bring him. I found it deeply moving. It was a book about a man who was gone far before his time was due, and I think that it will be a great read for any junior doctor. When Breath Becomes Air was first published by Random House in the year 2016. You can find it online and in print, and I highly recommend this book. The second topic that I'd like to talk about that will make this our best year yet is doing the hard work of studying. For those of you who thought that studying ends when you get your undergraduate degree, have I got news for you. Study methods are something that medical students often ask about in this podcast, but this is also applicable to interns and medical officers. The strange thing about me giving studying advice is that I feel a real sense of imposter syndrome here. The reason I say this is that there were many times that I did not apply the advice that I'm going to give you. I learned the hard way sometimes, and I made plenty of dumb mistakes as a medical student, but I hope that some or maybe all of what I say is useful and really helps you. So I think the first principle that should be understood by everyone is that the absolute best, gold standard, surefire study method for you is whatever gets you to learn and remember your curriculum in a way that helps you to recall it accurately and apply it. That's right, what I'm saying is the right way to study for your degree in medical school is whatever gets you to put your butt in your seat and sit and study. Here are a few keys that I think can make a difference. All of them are practical, evidence-backed study methods that are recommended, and I've used each of these to various degrees, and I know others have also found useful. The first key is Pomodoro or time blocking studying. The biggest hurdle to studying is just getting started. And the way Pomodoro works is that you study for 20 to 25 minutes in a block and then take a 5-minute break. By choosing to study like this, after 4 repetitions, you will have studied for 2 hours, at which point you can take a 20 to 30 minute break. Now, this is useful in a number of ways. Firstly, you no longer feel like you need a couple of hours to get started. I think the biggest cause of procrastination is people are looking for a perfect, uninterrupted window of 4 hours to study in with good light, a comfortable chair, and infinite snacks. But in reality, study opportunities often come in bits and pieces and snatches of 30 minutes. What Pomodoro allows is the freedom to say, I've only got 20 minutes available between tuts. That sounds like a good gap for a quick study block. You work for as long as your attention span holds. Some people only have an attention span of 17 to 18 minutes, whereas others can push it a little bit to more than 30 minutes before they start to feel distracted. The beauty of the Pomodoro technique is that you know you have a little break that you can take when you feel distraction hitting, and instead of feeling frustrated that you couldn't keep going, you can just take your break and then reset and go again. You can also defer distraction for a later time. This builds discipline, and it also helps you to prioritize your studies. There are very few WhatsApp emergencies that needed a reply right away, and if it is urgent, they'll call. But you can push aside distraction for 20 minutes at a time, knowing that you're going to get your 5 minutes soon. It helps you to break up the day, and it gives you chances to refresh however you see fit. In reality, no one can work for 8 hours straight of solid concentration. There's an old story about how the workday was set to be 8 hours long because Henry Ford found that if it was longer, because other factories often had 10 or 12-hour shifts, his factory workers made more mistakes and had more work accidents. I'm not sure how true that is, but one thing I can guarantee is that you'll find it hard to get in 8 hours of studying every day unless you build in intentional breaks and opportunities to rest. I first came across the Pomodoro technique when I was preparing to write the entrance exams for medical school at Wits in 2017. I found it via a YouTube channel called Med School Insiders, and I'll link to that video in the show notes, as well as a second video they published about the ways that students use the Pomodoro technique incorrectly. Study method tip number 2, summaries. It goes without saying that in medicine, there's a lot to study. And of course, summaries are a great tool for studying, whether you made your own or you use someone else's. If you've never used summary notes before, you really need to rethink your strategy because you're wasting twice as much time for half the benefit. Summaries give you the most pertinent information to hand in the fastest way. Now, when I say summaries, I want to expand that beyond just summary notes like the first aid for the USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 that I use to study medicine, to include review articles, protocol books, and YouTube videos, and all of these sources in one way or another summarize a great body of evidence to give you the highest yield information. Reading an up-to-date article on a topic is in a sense reading a summary, but you're going to be getting the highest yield information on that topic, the stuff that will help you to master 90% of it. The granular details on the subjects in medicine are best left to the consultants to discuss. As a junior doctor or a medical student, for now, you'll want to make sure you master the most important knowledge first, and that means working smarter, not harder. When you're in surgery rotation, you'll find the website teachmesurgery.com to be really useful, as well as Andre Tan's MedBear series. Toronto Notes, although quite a large volume, is even better and more advanced than the USMLE First Aid Notes. The Barra Protocol book for neonates is amazing. All of these are examples of summary resources to use. I'll include links to some of these resources in the show notes of this episode. I don't think I need to say too much more on this topic. Summaries are a great tool for helping you know the stuff that is most crucial and most important. And that's a vitally important point. In medicine, there are some non-negotiable conditions that you must know. And then there are rare unicorn conditions that you need to know a little bit about, but basically how to appropriately refer. So what do I mean by this? Well, as a junior doctor, you'll be much more used to your patients as well as your seniors if you understand and know how to treat heart failure and diabetes rather than von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, because you'll see far more patients with heart failure and diabetes, and much sicker too, than patients who have von Hippel-Lindau syndrome. I want to briefly interrupt our discussion about studying methods with a bit of a dad joke, and it's okay because I'm a dad, I'm allowed to say it. During a test, people look up for inspiration, down in desperation, and left and right for information. The third tip under studying methods is to write a plan. That's right, write a plan. I found this extremely useful as a student, and it helped me to get good sleep in the run into exams and also made sure I had covered all the work. What I would do is I would work backwards from the date of the exam as scheduled and include all of the sections that needed to be covered. So typically I would do this 10 to 7 days out from the exam. And then starting with the sections I knew I needed to revise the most, either because they counted the most or they were the ones that I needed more revision in, I populated the days with subjects to study. I ranked sections in order of importance in kind of vague categories so that if I needed to drop a section in order to make space or to ensure that a subject got adequately covered, I could choose to sacrifice a smaller section or one that I felt I knew well enough. And this seemed to work for me very well in the final 2 years, that's 5th and 6th year, that I applied it in. Remember, if you fail to prepare, it's preparation for failure. So write a plan. Even if you don't stick to the plan completely, at least you've made a plan that you know what you're going to be studying on each day. Point number 4, under study method tips. Begin from the very start of each block on day numero uno, day 1. Don't fall behind. One of my favorite memes is a picture of a medical school freshman, which is the term for first years in America, with his clipboard ready and an eager grin and a white coat, and the text above and below him says, "First day of medical school, already a week behind." It's amazing actually just how much work there is to cover in medicine. And whether you're a student, an intern, or a medical officer, even a registrar listening to this podcast, don't put stuff off too late. Just make sure that you're learning something new each day. There's an expression about tackling big tasks like studying medicine, and it goes like this: how do you eat an elephant? Well, the answer to that is one bite at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you study a big subject? One page at a time. As an intern, I'm loving learning new things every day, as well as revising past knowledge. I've said it before on the podcast, but when I graduated, although I got very good marks and I never failed an exam and in the end passed quite comfortably, there were still spaces in my knowledge and lots of things that I knew I hadn't mastered. So now, as an intern, I'm relishing going back and rereading my notes that I made before, as well as reading for enjoyment and for knowing it rather than trying to pass a test. Again, I think this comes down to having that growth mindset, as we discussed earlier. Improving just a little bit each day has compound interest-like gains. Finally, under the study methods section, there are an embarrassing array of other study resources like Anki flashcards, which have many decks that other people have put together for you, Chegg, and a website called StudyStack. Time simply doesn't allow me to talk about every single flashcard app and resource. YouTube is full of video lectures, tutorials, audiobooks, OSCE demonstrations, and other videos. Provided that you have the discipline to watch the important videos only, it can be an amazing tool. I used Khan Academy Medicine a lot, especially in the early part of my degree, and I want to suggest to you a little trick that will spare you from being distracted when studying using YouTube. The first thing I would do is I would identify what videos I was going to watch well in advance of my actual study time. I did this when I was relaxed, whether it was between lectures or tuts, or when I was at home, but basically not studying, okay, things like that. Then I would choose those videos and download them for offline viewing later. This was especially good because I could listen to the videos while I was walking or driving or sometimes even gymming without burning through my data, and I wouldn't be distracted by ads or the suggested videos that follow. Also, this was good for load shedding, so if you're not able to read your notes in the dark or watch videos online, at least you have something that you can study, something that you can revise. The Dr. Coffee podcast has also started generating some videos for junior doctors and medical students. I started producing a video series called 10-Minute Tuts, which is really because most of the videos cover a topic in 10 minutes or less, from the definition and etiology, right through pathophysiology and clinical presentation, and ending with what investigations and management to follow. They're designed to be a resource that can help you when you're clerking a patient at admissions or getting ready to present a patient in the ward round, to make sure that you didn't overlook anything and to make sure that you understand the topic correctly. I hope that you find this resource really useful. You can find it on the Dr. Coffee Podcast YouTube channel just by looking for Dr. Coffee ZA or hashtag 10-Minute Tuts on YouTube. We're now moving to part 3 of making this year your best year yet. Part 3 is all about self-care. This is probably the most important set of interventions, which is why I've saved it for last. No matter how good a doctor you are, you can't look after others if you're not well yourself. And whether it's physical illness or mental illness, when you're unwell, your capacity to generate the outcomes we were talking about in the other segments will be compromised. So around the theme of self-care, let this be the year you choose to work on your habits in daily life to look after yourself better. Looking around at some of the doctors I work with, I realize we work so hard for others that we neglect to look after ourselves. Doctors look like they're about to fall apart. They eat like trash and they do not look like paragons of health. Some take better care of their pot plants than they do of themselves. I'm sure you've seen the meme, and by now you know that I consume memes like oxygen. The meme of the doctor advising their patient to cut down on fast food and then bumping into them in the queue at McDonald's. Besides eating unhealthy diets, there are plenty of obstacles to health we can remove. I think part of it comes down to our mindset, and that is not accepting living at a level that others want to choose to settle into. We can't afford to become self-indulgent. And you know what self-indulgence is? It's saying to yourself, I work hard, I deserve this slab of chocolate, I deserve this 4-hour Netflix binge. And you go down a road until your indulgences have allowed you to build an unhealthy life with unhealthy habits and unhealthy coping mechanisms. Which leads me to talk about a very serious topic. Mental health is crucial to the success of medical students and junior doctors, possibly more so than physical health even. I think it's been unrecognized for too long just how traumatic it is to learn and work in our current health system, which is broken in so many ways. We have equipment and resources issues. We have patients who span the entire spectrum from overly dependent and needy all the way to belligerent and even physically violent towards junior doctors. And sometimes that can be even in the same patient on the same day. And sometimes we also have negative seniors who are processing through their own trauma and passing it on to their juniors or acting out towards them. A big issue, as you all know, is that no one can diagnose mental health issues just by looking at someone or a physical exam. Like an iceberg, where 90% of the mass is under the surface, by the time people can see that you have a problem, it's potentially already too late. If your leg is injured, you might walk around with a crutch or have a cast, and your injury is obvious, and people are sympathetic to it and make special concessions to accommodate your health challenge. But unfortunately, many serious mental health or psychiatric issues have no visible physical manifestation. So people cannot see your health challenge, and they don't make concessions, and they're not sympathetic. Burnout, moral injury, and depression are real, and they are a silent pandemic amongst healthcare workers. So many of us are not at our best that it's actually difficult to find someone who has a clean bill of health. We learn in medicine that depressed people are disheveled, they can't sleep, and they eat badly. But if that's how so many of us are living anyway because of how busy clinical medicine is, how can we really tell when our colleagues are battling? As I said, This is an important and urgent topic, and we will be discussing mental health and depression in an upcoming episode with someone who actually works with healthcare workers and knows how to bring them back from the brink. But for now, I want to beg you, don't live in isolation. Let others know where you're at and when you're struggling. No matter how clever and successful you are, no matter how strong you are, you need people. We all need people to mentor and encourage us. Please take steps this year to look after your mental health. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist from the Stanford School of Medicine and host of the wildly successful Huberman Lab podcast, shares that our mental health is largely dependent on 5 major factors: how much sleep we get and the quality of that sleep, nutrition, which is making sure we get the right sorts of macro and micronutrients, and balancing the timing of meals for improved focus and concentration, as well as the right other parts of our diet, such as limiting alcohol, getting exercise, which is specifically the right frequency, intensity, time or duration and type of exercise, and then very interestingly, exposure to sunlight, particularly morning sunlight, or what Huberman calls low solar angle sunlight, to enhance our circadian rhythms and the timing of the release of certain hormones in the body. And finally, having meaningful social connections. So that's sleep, nutrition, exercise, exposure to sunlight, and meaningful social connections. And that is our friends, our family, and encouraging co-workers. All of these 5 deserve full-length episodes in and of themselves, and you can find lots of excellent episodes on these topics on the Huberman Lab podcast. And I look forward to getting expert guests onto this podcast this year to help us all learn and grow in these areas. But as time simply does not allow us to expand on all of these topics in this episode, and because I'd like you to listen to future episodes of the podcast, for now I want to say again, please look after yourself, look after your mental health, look after you. You matter. And please reach out to someone if you're having a bad day. And if someone tells you that they're having a bad day, let's listen. Let's take it seriously. At very least, let's take it as seriously as we would take it if a patient said it to us. With regards to exercise, this is one area that this year I feel particularly challenged to improve myself in. Not only as an aspect of self-care for now, but since I'm getting a little bit older, also as an insurance policy against future disease and adverse effects. So I sat down for a brief conversation with my brother, sports scientist and elite obstacle course athlete and coach, Richard Fraser, to talk about exercise programs and the positive benefits of exercise. And I hope that you enjoy the short interview as well. Richard Fraser is a sports scientist with over 10 years experience in sports coaching and strength conditioning, having worked with a vast array of clients ranging from personal training clients and recreational athletes all the way up to high-level professional athletes. He's a former competitive MMA fighter and currently an elite-level obstacle racing athlete and coach. With a passion for wellness, exercise, and nutrition for health and performance, Richard chooses to practice what he preaches in his own daily life. It's a privilege to have him on the Dr. Coffee podcast with us today to tell us a little bit more about the importance of exercise for self-care and making 2023 our best year yet. So welcome to the Dr. Coffee podcast, Richard Fraser. Good to have you.
Hello, Sa. Thank you. And thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about what is the prescription or the guideline of what a kind of activity and exercise people should be doing. What should we be looking to achieve every single week?
Okay, so when it comes to recommending exercise activities, we generally follow the ACSM or American College of Sports Medicine and the CDC recommendations. And their current standpoint is that every adult between the age of 18 to 65 should be doing at least 5 aerobic exercise sessions of 30 minutes per session, 5 times a week. And they should also be doing 2 to 3 strength-based sessions per week as well. And those can be separate sessions from each other, or they could be combined into one session, but that is the bare minimum recommendation for health and to help prevent any number of lifestyle diseases that that exercise can help prevent.
That's quite a lot. I mean, when you're saying 5 sessions of 20 to 30 minutes every single week as a bare minimum, adding up to between 100 and 150 minutes of aerobic activity, plus then to have 2 or 3 sessions of weight or resistance training. That's quite intense activity when you think about it. So we in medical school learn about the FIT model: frequency, intensity, time, and type, where, as you've alluded to, you need to be doing it enough days a week. You need to be training at the right intensity. I think we learned that it needs to be at 6 or 7 METs or more in order to count.
Or 40 to 60% of your max heart rate, which would classify as moderate aerobic exercise.
Okay.
And above that would classify as sort of high intensity aerobic exercise. So if you're not using METs, if you're using, for example, a heart rate monitor, a wrist-based heart rate monitor, or a strap, then you can use that as a rough guideline. It's pretty easy. That aerobic activity is pretty easy. You can get away with doing shorter, more intense exercise sessions.
Okay.
But you get more benefit from doing more numerous, moderate aerobic activity sessions in your week versus doing fewer high intensity sessions. That consistency and that daily routine is very important for health, and that is generally the best way to get it going with your exercise.
Wow. Okay. So if we were using our heart rate monitors as a reference, okay, most of our listeners would typically be between the ages of 20 or 30. So if you take max heart rate is 220 minus 20 to 30, we're looking at a max heart rate of about 100.
Terrible calculation.
Oh,
as
really?
I'm sure you know, those age predicted heart rate zones and age predicted max heart rate is pretty off.
But you're not going to advise people to push to their max to see what it is, correct?
It depends on the person. If you have a young, fit individual, there are field-based max heart rate tests that are quite safe to do. If you really want to know the true max, you would do that in a laboratory setting. But there are some very good field tests that you can do. We can attach some links to some sources of those test information sources for those tests if people want, and then they can calculate their heart rate zones based on that, because generally the age-based max heart rate predictions are bad, and the zones that you get on your watch are based on that typically, and they're not good either. So it is definitely worthwhile to calculate your own max heart rate. And then there's a website you can type that into, My Pro Coach, and you can get your estimated heart rate zones from that and update them on your device if you're using one. That's amazing. A very good way.
Thank you for that. And without insulting any of the listeners, I don't think many of the people listening to this podcast are elite level athletes that will need to know what their max heart rate is. Sure. So just as a rough guide, give us an idea of what is a good range for certain aerobic activities. So if you're saying 5 times 30 minutes a week, what is a good heart rate? Would you say between 130 and 150 is a good training range?
Again, that's all relative, because you get such inter-individual variation in heart rate that for me to say 130 to 160 is a good moderate intensity, I just can't do it, because I've seen people who are redlining at 130 and they're in zone 5, which is way too high to be classified as moderate or aerobic exercise, and other people who might be at 160 and they're walking on the treadmill, and talking. So I can't really give you a recommendation based on that, but what I can say is that easy and moderate aerobic exercise should feel light. It should feel like a 5 to 6 out of 10 if you were using a rating of perceived exertion. So I think anyone can think from 1 to 10 how hard is this, and give themselves a rating. And as well as the talk test. If somebody can have a conversation with you or you can have a conversation with someone while you're exercising, then it's light to moderate exercise, and that's a good zone to be in while you're exercising.
Like the audience can't see right now, but you and I are actually on spinning bikes, churning out 220 watts right now. And, we're able to have a conversation. 220 watts is easy for us. We can keep going this all day. Okay, most interns are spending a lot of the day on their feet. they are walking an average of more than 10,000 steps a day, certainly, sometimes up to 25,000 steps per day. Should we count that as part of our exercise time in the week?
So that is physical activity, sure, and no doubt that's going to contribute to your basal energy expenditure, and it is physical, I know that, but your exercise session should be separate from that. They should be focused, structured workout sessions that are not part of your daily steps that you do at work and so on. So you shouldn't be setting time aside for that.
So what you're saying is that it's not enough to say, gosh, I've been walking for 10 hours today. You still need to make the time to put that discipline in, to get to gym, get on a bike, lift some weights.
Absolutely. And I like that you said you still need to make the time, because a lot of people, I hear this all the time from prospective clients, that they don't have time to exercise. And I say to them, I don't have time to exercise, but I still do 10 to 20 hours of exercise a week because I make the time. And it has to be something that you put into your daily routine, and it's got to be consistent. And that's where the type of activity that you're doing is important, because you should be choose an activity that you enjoy. There's so much you can do. There's so much you have to choose from that will give you those aerobic benefits. And if it means signing up to a group exercise class, or signing up to the gym, or anything that's going to get you motivated, buy yourself a new pair of expensive running shoes so that you'll get out there and use them. There's a lot of ways you can go about it, and the key is consistency and enjoying your exercise so that it'll promote longevity.
So earlier in the podcast today, I spoke about the power of mindset.
Sure.
And this idea of continuous growth and continuous improvement, where I said, if we just tweak a 1% improvement every single day, the gains at the end of a year can be significant, far more than we ever imagined, because you're compounding your improvements every day. One of the weaknesses people have is they can maybe start out too hot out the gates.
Sure.
So what do you think about how people should approach starting a new exercise program?
So I see this all the time. A lot of people, and especially in running, they start with the best of intentions, all the enthusiasm in the world, and get out the door and they go and do too much too soon. And especially if you're adding that onto an already stressful work life, that's going to be detrimental to your health for sure. So you've got to start easy, build up at a reasonable rate. It might not even be meeting the minimum standard for now, but you'll build up to that. So even if it's 2 to 3 aerobic sessions a week, or runs or walks, whatever you're doing, cycling, start easy, build it up. And again, the intensity is so important, especially at the beginning. Easy intensity. Everyone wants to jump to the high intensity interval training and the speed work and all of that, but that's where you pick up injuries. That's where you pick up, you overload yourself, and you'll end up doing yourself a disservice, because you'll likely fall out of the exercise routine pretty quickly. Whereas if you start light and you finish your workout session and you feel like, I could have still gone a little bit more, but I was disciplined and controlled, and I know tomorrow I can come back and do the exact same workout session again if I wanted to, and I will still manage. That's a good intensity to start at. And then in terms of progressing it in the long term, we generally use between 5 to 10% progression per week. So that might be, if you're running, you start with three running sessions a week, and that means you're running, let's say for example 15 kilometers a week. Then next week you add 10% to that. What's 10% of 15?
It's 1.5 days.
Okay. So that's very conservative, but and that kind of gives you an idea of how slowly you should be progressing. Don't overcook it. Rather look at it in terms of the amount of months, years you're going to accumulate with this routine of exercise, rather than 2 weeks of really hectic exercise and then you fall out of it and you're injured and sick. That's the way we should be looking at it.
Very good. So if I was to bring this a little bit closer to home and personalize this a little bit, talk us through a typical week for Richard in terms of your training and your schedule, so we have something to aim at. Maybe we can dream of being in it.
So it does depend on the training phase that I'm in, or whether I'm in off-season training, pre-season, in competition season. But generally in a big week, it could be anywhere between 10 and 20 hours a week of a lot of it will be running, cycling, cardio-based exercise, and then 4 to 5 hours of resistance training a week. That's often mixed sessions. So because I do obstacle racing, it's running mixed with a whole bunch of functional exercises, climbing over things, under things, crawling through mud, you name it. So depending on the season, 10 to 20 hours a week.
And then you said an additional 5 hours of resistance training.
It just depends on the season. Sometimes that resistance training comes right down to 2-3 hours. If I'm close to an event, and that the strength training component gets a bit smaller, and the aerobic and anaerobic endurance component in my training gets a lot higher. It just depends on the season.
You're obviously very passionate about obstacle course racing. There's been a major push in the last 20 years towards more what they call functional fitness, even though, for example, in CrossFit, when they're lifting things up over their heads or they're doing kipping pull-ups, that's not necessarily a functional movement in the sense of that's something you do every day, but it's based on movements and exercises that force you to move in multiple planes, multiple directions. So talk us about obstacle course racing. What's the big draw for you?
Yeah, well, it's not CrossFit, that's for sure. Yeah, you had to mention CrossFit, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
No, you can't hate on CrossFit. There's people who like CrossFit that listen to this podcast.
Yeah, I won't say anything negative about CrossFit. It's not for me. Obstacle racing it's a mixture of running and functional exercises, as I said, and the reason why I enjoy functional fitness as a whole is because it improves people's capacity to do daily, to just do life better. So if you can lift something heavy, and then sprint down the road at 3 minutes a k, and then carry your children all around all day, it improves your life, and you can do activities that require a certain level of physical fitness to enjoy. I've got numerous examples of clients whose lives have been significantly improved by getting stronger, improving their cardiovascular endurance, and they can engage in all of these activities that they want to without limitations. And that's the important thing, and that's why I think functional fitness is so good, because like you said, it is using multi-joint or complex movements, things that we encounter in life, your body weight, lifting heavy things, cardio, respiratory endurance activities. It's just all encompassing, and that's why I believe it is the best way to exercise.
Richard, you mentioned many of the benefits of exercise there. You touched on people being able to carry their children and enjoy their lives more. Can you just give us some of the evidence-based, from studies and from reviews, what are some of the benefits of exercise and why we should be taking it seriously in 2023, just as we come to a close on this segment of the podcast?
Well, so there's lots of studies on this topic. I've got one here. This study is entitled Recommended Physical Activity and All-Cause and Cause-Specific Mortality in U.S. Adults, a prospective cohort study by Zhao et al. In the British Medical Journal 2020. And we'll attach a link to this.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for people to follow.
This study, I must say beforehand, one of the limitations of the study was that it was self-reported stats on how much exercise people were doing.
And as you know, everyone inflates their figures just a little bit. Everyone's 5K time is suddenly under 25 minutes.
Everyone except me. And this study followed 479,856 adults aged 18 years or older.
Sure, that's a lot of people. That's nearly 500,000 people.
It's a lot, and I think necessary for the kind of information we want to know about the benefits of exercise. The study found, in a quick summarized terms, found that exercise according to the prescribed recommended amounts of
That's
strength
the 5
training,
times 30 and 2 to 3 sessions a week of
Yes,
strength
of
training. Yeah.
strength training and aerobic activity, it reduced all-cause mortality and cause-specific mortality greatly, significantly. And Sai, you've got a few more stats.
Yeah, you were talking, I mean, I was reading this paper, you just showed it to me, and, it talks about death due to cancer, due to cardiovascular disease, due to chronic lower respiratory tract diseases, and the reduction in harms or the reduction in mortality is significant.
Huge.
The one that's most glaring to me is that for people who did aerobic activity at the recommended guidelines, 5 times 30 minutes a week, those people had a reduction, or the hazard ratio, a reduction of 60%. So they had a hazard ratio of 0.4 compared to the control group, which is the people who did
mortality.
no, this is for this is now for chronic lower respiratory tract diseases, right?
Sorry.
For people who were doing the right amount of aerobic activity, they were getting a 60% reduction.
Yeah.
That's less than half. It's even better if you're somebody who does both. So if you're doing the aerobic exercise and the weight training, then the odds ratio is 0.3, or the hazard ratio. So that means a 70% reduction. That's
huge.
mad. But it doesn't end there, because people who are doing both forms of activity are also getting a 40% reduction in the number of people dying from cancer.
Huge.
They're getting a 50% reduction in people who are dying from cardiovascular disease.
I was going to say that I'm surprised that the cancer reduction is bigger than cardiovascular, but it's not.
It's not, yeah. No. So it's all about how you interpret data correctly, right?
Absolutely.
But the gist of it is, there's nothing better for your health than following exercise and the right type, intensity, time, and frequency according to these guidelines,
Absolutely.
which I think is the bottom line of what we're
Absolutely.
getting at here. And especially to drive home the point that for an intern, if you're going up and down stairs, if you're walking all through the hospital, it's not enough for you to say, well, I did 500 calories of energy today. Oh, I did 25,000 steps. It's really not enough. In order to get the benefits from exercise, it needs to be focused. It needs to be structured. It needs to be proper exercise time. Richie, it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast to share a little bit of the insights, to share a little bit about your journey in exercise. But where can people find you on social media? I want them to be able to see how long you can hang from tennis balls and grips.
So people can find me on Instagram at Richie_the_hammer, and that's about it. I'm mainly active on Instagram, not really on Facebook.
Okay, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes for this episode. Thank you, Richie. It's been great to have you on the podcast.
Cool, thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Dr. Coffee Podcast. How to make 2023 your best year yet. I hope you enjoyed it and feel motivated, encouraged, and inspired. If you have feedback on what you thought of this episode, please get in touch. The podcast email address is drcoffeeza@gmail.com. That's drcoffeeza with no punctuation marks. We're also on Instagram and YouTube with the username @drcoffeeza. If you've got anything else in your mind, such as a request for additional topics or further information on how to engage with our guests, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to check out some of the supporters and partners of the Dr. Coffee Podcast mentioned in this episode, and a reminder that you can find links to everything mentioned in this episode in the show notes on whatever platform you're listening on. While you're there, please leave a rating or review. Consider sharing this episode with fellow junior doctors and medical students in your world who you think would benefit from the content and enjoy it. Thank you so much for your support.